Okay, so picture this. You're walking through Italy, cobblestone streets under your feet, old stone buildings all around, you're eating a gelato, and then you look up. Wait, what are those? You're surrounded by these really tall medieval towers all around you, but they aren't a part of the city walls. They aren't military watchtowers. They barely even have any windows. They're just these tall brick blocks scattered all around the city. But why? This is San Gimignano, a small hilltop town in the Tuscan countryside, and it's just like any other Italian medieval town, with just one or a few caveats reaching to the sky. If you're intrigued by this, you're in luck, because today we're going to answer the question, why does this medieval city have skyscrapers? Welcome to World Explained. My name is Anton, and my goal is to teach you a new interesting fact about our world with every new episode. So get your Vespa, warm up your terrible Italian accent, and let's find out what is up with all these weird towers. So to get things off, let's familiarize ourselves with the place we're talking about today. San Gimignano is a tiny town in the Tuscany region of Italy, about an hour drive from Florence. It sits on top of a hill, surrounded by rolling green fields, olive groves, and vineyards. It's the kind of place you imagine when you think of an Italian countryside paradise. The kind of place where you imagine yourself walking into a pizzeria and impressing all the locals with your perfect Italian after learning it for 3 weeks on Duolingo. Anyway, San Gimignano is old. Like really old. It started way back in the 3rd century BC, or the 23rd century before Backstreet Boys for non-Christians, when the ancient Etruscans built a little settlement there. The Romans later built a castle on the hill called Silvia, later renamed to San Gimignano after Saint Geminianus. But the city's heyday wouldn't come until the Middle Ages, around the 1100s to 1300s, 800s BBB to 600s BBB, when it became a stop for travelers on the Via Francigena, a big road that connected northern Europe to Rome. So imagine pilgrims, merchants, knights, and other travelers all walking through this hilltop town. The Middle Ages is also when this video's protagonists, the city's distinctive towers, were built. See, at its peak, San Gimignano had over 70 towers scattered throughout the city. So, who built them? And why? Well, back in the medieval times, San Gimignano was full of powerful merchant families, people who made their fortunes trading wool, wine, and saffron, the kind of people your annoying former high school classmate thinks he is by doing dropshipping. And when people get rich, what do? They buy PNGs of monkeys, but above all, they want everyone to know they're rich. And when you lived in a cramped city limited by its city walls, the best way to flex on your neighbors was to start making really tall stacks of bricks. Over centuries, the powerful families in San Gimignano battled over who could construct the highest tower among them in a game of
Bah! My father built a tower that is 160 feet tall. Meanwhile, your father built a tower that is only 140 feet tall. You really are a pathetic loser.
Can't argue with that. Gotta respect the hustle. Now, I gotta be fair to these people. These towers weren't just for show. They had real purposes too. Each tower had 3 main jobs. One practical, one protective, and well, one of them was just to dunk on the plebs. The practical purpose of a tower like this was that it was attached to the family's main home, which was typically below it, and could be used for storage and a bit of extra space, for example. The families wouldn't really live in these towers, mainly because they really sucked at being houses. If you're thinking of a cozy penthouse with stunning views of the Tuscan countryside, get that out of your head, because living in one of these towers would have been a living nightmare. Now, obviously the rooms would have been tiny, and every time you wanted to do anything, you would have had to move up or down at least 3 flights of stairs. But that's not even the bad part. Before any sort of heating or air conditioning systems, these towers would have been at the mercy of whatever the weather happened to be like at the time. In summer, it would have been like living in the world's tallest oven, while in winter, they would have turned into a medieval version of a fridge. And worse yet, you wouldn't even get to enjoy the views. Most of these towers had like 1 or 2 tiny windows, so unless your room happened to have one of them, your view would have looked like this. So, like I said, these towers would have mostly been used as storage for the family's valuables. And also in the winter, it would have been nice to throw a couple beers up there so that they'd stay nice and cold. I don't have any evidence that they did this, but then again, if they didn't, they must have been morons. Also, you know I've just spent the past minute or so destroying your dreams of a medieval Italian tower core fantasy. Well, forget everything I just said, because while researching this video, I found that you can actually rent out the Torre Salvucci Maggiore for about 400 euros a night. Like, the entire tower. I don't know how they've been allowed to do this. Isn't this place like a UNESCO World Heritage Site? But I mean, that's kinda cool. I mean, you are living in some dude's storage who lived 700 years ago, but now they have AC, a shower. I mean, I'm starting to ramble, but just how insane is that? Imagine living in a historical landmark Anyway, these towers also served a protective purpose because they could be used as a sort of a miniature castle. If rival families ever started fighting in the streets, you could just retreat up to your tower, lock yourself in, and wait for the coast to clear. Now, of course, these towers weren't exactly cheap to build. It was a status symbol exactly because you had to be pretty rich to even afford to own one, which is why these families decided to engage in a silly tower measuring contest for generations. But how tall could these towers really have been? Well, it turns out, quite tall. Some of these towers reach over 50 meters or 170 feet high. That's like a 15 or 20-story building. The city's tallest tower, Torre Grossa, literally meaning tower or big, has a height of 54 meters or 177 feet. To put it into context, that is taller than the tallest building in South Dakota, or the tallest building in Liechtenstein for my European viewers, or the tallest building in Pemalang, Central Java, Indonesia, for my viewers from Pemalang, Central Java, Indonesia. Eventually, the tower building got so out of hand that the city had to ban the building of towers beyond a certain height, which was more or less successful. At its height, the city had an estimated number of 70 towers dotting the city, and we're talking about an area about the size of an average shopping center, so there would have been one at just about every corner. But what was the most remarkable about all of this was just how unremarkable it was. Up until this point, I've talked to you as if San Gimignano was somehow unique in doing this, which couldn't be further from the truth. If you were to go to medieval Italy right now, you would get the plague and die. But before that, it would be really difficult to find a city that wasn't filled with these towers. They had them in Rome, Florence, Lucca, Siena, Bologna, and San Gimignano isn't even the only city that still has them left. Here's Bologna's famous two towers, the taller of which is a whopping 97 meters tall. Really what makes San Gimignano so unique is how many of its towers it has managed to retain in such a compact area. They actually have more of these towers in places like Bologna and Pavia, but nowhere else do you have a total of 14 of these towers within just a 3-minute walk of each other. But then, that naturally raises the question, why is that? Well, there's 3 main reasons why most cities in Italy got rid of nearly all of their towers in the 14 and 1500s. Changing technology, societal changes, and because they came to be seen as problematic. First, one of the reasons these towers were built in the first place was to offer security for wealthy families in times of uncertainty. But as military technology developed, especially as trebuchets and early cannons became more widespread, the defensive value of these towers took a nosedive. For example, during a siege, one of these towers became less of a safe house and more of a glaring target for the besieging army. Second, by the 1400s, power had shifted from rivaling families towards communal governments, guilds, and republics, like famously in the case of Florence, for example. With this, it became more important to build relationships with other rich families in your city, rather than building these goofy towers. Additionally, as the ideas of the Renaissance swept through Italy, many cities began to be more and more interested in urban aesthetics. The old towers that were once seen as symbols of wealth and glamour began to be viewed as ugly relics of a time gone by that couldn't coexist with the Renaissance ideals in beauty and aesthetics. And lastly, these towers slowly became a symbol of social unrest and violence between wealthy families, which is why many cities across northern Italy started implementing height limits on new towers and eventually began cutting them down or demolishing them. Cities like Florence, Siena, Bologna, and Rome went from having possibly hundreds of these towers to just about a dozen each. And in the case of Florence, for example, they were cut down by so much and camouflaged into the surrounding architecture that you'd be forgiven if you happened to walk past one and not even notice. Well, that explains why other cities in Italy got rid of their towers. But why didn't San Gimignano? Well, the short answer is that they actually did get rid of most of their towers. As mentioned before, at its peak, the city had around 70 tower houses. Meanwhile, today they have just 14. But that's not the full story, because no other city has its center dominated by these towers quite like San Gimignano. To summarize the reason why, it's because the town became kinda irrelevant. See, the city flourished during the late medieval period, but then in the mid-1300s, this was ended by a little thing called the Black Death. Now, it's not like any other city was immune from this, but San Gimignano never had a large population to begin with, and when even that was cut in half by the plague, it became practically impossible to maintain its economic prosperity. San Gimignano had to surrender its autonomy to Florence, who initially began modernizing the city by taking down many of its towers, but eventually even they lost interest in the town, and San Gimignano Gimignano slowly turned into a rural backwater, and as such, they never fully experienced the Renaissance, which meant that there was never a large-scale effort to renovate the city according to Renaissance principles, and even if they wanted to do something like that, they simply couldn't afford to, and thus San Gimignano had become frozen in time. It was only in the 1800s when people began to appreciate the beauty of the medieval skyline of the city. It was placed under monumental protection in 1929, and in 1990, it was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Today, visitors come from all over the world to walk its narrow streets, taste its white wine, called Vernaccia by the way, which I think I'm gonna have to buy a bottle of for the sake of research purposes, of course, and of course stare up at those crazy towers. Today, the town has earned the nickname the Medieval Manhattan for obvious reasons, or so I'm told. Personally, I don't understand how this town has anything to do with Manhattan, Kansas. Anyway, what have we learned today? Well, humans are petty and vain, and they will spend insane amounts of money and time creating something stupid just to impress their neighbors, who don't like them anyway, only to get bored of said stupid thing and take it down. Unless they don't have enough money, then they won't take it down, and eventually their grandchildren will think whatever stupid thing they made is cool, quirky, and beautiful. But talking of small medieval European towns that lived past their prime way too early, chances are that if you enjoyed this video on San Gimignano, you'll also enjoy this documentary I made about how this tiny Belgian town actually used to be a major European city. Go check it out. Anyway, I need to go learn Italian on Duolingo so that I can impress everyone the next time I go there.